Thank you. Hello and welcome, everyone. Apologies, we had some technical issues. I see people are just popping in now. Thank you very much for sticking with us, and very sorry for those technical issues. We'll just give it another 1 or 2 moments as more people pop in. Hello and welcome. I'll just give it another about 10 or 15 seconds. Thank you so much for sticking with us. Sorry about the technical issues. We're really grateful. Okay. Welcome, everybody. We'll just get going. Apologies again about the delay. And thank you very much for coming to this Fringe, Can Equal Votes Save the World? My name's Cormac Manning. A Green Party member, and I work for Make Votes Matter, a single issue campaign to change the voting system from first past the post to proportional representation. We have a great panel of speakers for you this afternoon. We've got Klina Jordan, the co-founder and co-chief executive of Make Votes Matter, who's dedicated the last many years of her life to this cause. We have Zack Polanski, who I'm sure will be very familiar to many of you. He's a Green Party candidate for London Assembly, which of course is an election that is under a proportional system. And we have Alan Story from Doncaster and Get PR Done, who has been campaigning for PR, and he's going to tell you a bit about his experiences and the active work that he's been doing. Before I pass you over to the hosts, to the panel, I'll just outline what we'll be doing. So we'll have each of the panel will talk for a little bit. As they speak, if you have any questions, pop them into the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat, and we'll have some time for some questions and answers. But we very much want to make this an interactive session. Sometimes it can be very tiring just sitting there all day looking at Zoom screens. So we're going to try to split into breakout rooms as long as the technology allows us to do that. So we have time for some discussion, basically, and planning campaign events. So very quickly, just to set the scene, because I know some people will have campaigned on this issue for decades, and some people will be curious and have come here for the first time. In terms of what we mean by equal votes, democracy, fair play, equality, they're core values when we think of who we are when we're at our best as a nation. They're when we treat people with democracy and equality. And we believe that the way that we choose our leaders should be the pinnacle of these values. We all deserve a say in the decisions that affect our lives, and we all deserve an equal say in who sits in number 10 making life and death decisions about our NHS, about our economy, and the future of our climate and the living world. But the problem is that when we go to vote, your vote is not equal to mine. And I'll say it again because that shocked me when I really learned it for the first time, is that your vote is not equal to mine. And it's not equal to your brother or your sister or your colleague or your friend or anyone else, because the system that we use to count our votes in the UK doesn't treat people equally. At the last general election, if you voted, let's say, for the Conservatives, you would have needed to convince about 38,000 other people to vote the same way that you did, and then you'd be given an MP in Parliament to represent you. But if you voted Labour and you got 38,000 other people to do the same thing, you wouldn't have got an MP in Parliament to represent you. You would have needed 51,000 people to vote Labour. If you were SNP, you would have needed only 26,000 people to vote with you. If you were Lib Dem, you would have needed 336,000. But the most dramatic figure of all is, of course, for our party, where you needed over 800,000 Green votes in order to get just one MP in Westminster. And I know, obviously, Caroline Lucas probably does the work of a dozen MPs, but this clearly is not fair that in our voting system, one person can, in effect, when you vote Green, you vote once. Depending on the party you vote for, you can vote equivalently up to 33 times and have that level of weight. So this is a problem, but this session isn't going to be just outlining all the various different problems with the system. It's going to be pretty action-oriented in terms of equipping you with the tools to make change and to get to the solution. Our panel are going to talk about many different actions that we can do. I'll give you 3 ones quickly, and I'll pop them in the chat for you to follow up on. Firstly, join the movement. Sign up to be part of Make Votes Matter. I'll pop in the link. Join us, become part of the campaign, and get as heavily or as lightly involved as you like. Secondly, invite a speaker. Over the summer at Make Votes Matter, we've been training volunteers to give talks explaining the case for equal votes, all online at the moment. These are people who are passionate about making the case for fair votes. So invite a speaker to talk at any political, civic, community, or religious group that you're a member of. I'll pop in the link. Invite a speaker to your local Green Party meeting or any other organization that you're a member of. Let's get the conversation going among wider society. And the final thing that I'll speak about before passing on to the panel is about tabling a motion at your trade union, which is a key action that we're ramping up over the next year. And this leads on to a very common question that people ask us, which is around the Labour Party. So our current government, they might be happy with unequal votes, but every opposition party in Parliament supports PR, except for 2, the DUP and the Labour Party. But Make Votes Matter polling shows that around 3/4 of Labour members support fair votes. There's a huge support at a grassroots level for it. And you may have seen that 2 weeks ago, we brought together a coalition of 9 organizations to launch Labour for a New Democracy, campaigning to get that party to adopt PR as policy at their next conference. Now, you're probably sitting there thinking, why am I talking about this? As Greens, I know a lot of us often can feel quite frustrated at Labour's position at PR, and even more frustrated sometimes that a lot of the things that we might want to do to persuade them can actually be quite counterproductive. And I know other people have various views on this, but oftentimes just saying, we need a better system. Unfortunately, there's some tribalists who will automatically react by saying anything the Greens say must be bad, or even worse, if the Lib Dems want it, it's definitely bad. But so it can be quite frustrating that not only is there a frustrating position here, but it often feels like there's little that we can do to shift it. But there is one big thing that Greens can do to effectively change Labour policy, and that's through tabling a motion at your trade union branch. Why is this so important? Unions, of course, are powerful campaigning organizations in their own right, but they're also extremely influential on Labour. And this motion that we're talking about at that conference next year, at their conference, unions have 50% of the vote. So one thing that we're saying is, if you're a member of a union, contact your branch secretary and put forward a motion to send to your trade union's next policy conference. Invite a speaker to your union branch. We have 5 trade unions which already have policy in favor of equal votes, and we think that we can certainly get many more. So definitely get involved in that side of the campaign. I think I've probably talked for long enough, so I'll pass on to our great panel. So first up is Alan Story from Doncaster Green Party and Get PR Done. And just before I pass over to Alan, I'll just remind everyone, if you have any questions that come up, just pop them in the chat and we'll have time for a short bit of questions and answers at the end. Alan, over to you.
Hi there, thanks Cormac, and thanks Klina for inviting me to speak here today and to increase the collaborative effort in the pro-PR campaign. Get PR Done, we're just a small fry compared to Make Votes Matter, but I'm glad you appreciate that we all have a role to play in this long struggle. And as you know, we've just applied to join Labour for a New Democracy, our group. Okay, I just wanted to say then that I don't always keep this sandwich board right here beside me in my office, but this is what we've been flogging around the country outside Labour events. I'll get to that in a few minutes. Okay, I want to make 3 points. Why campaigning for proportional representation should be given a much higher priority for us in the Green Party. I'm going to make only here the sort of the pragmatic self-interest case of why we really got to ramp up action on PR. Second, the societal benefits of PR and political benefits. And third, then briefly, the strategy of get PR done to achieve this. Okay, so this is a very pragmatic case, and I'm going to start with a question. Has a Green Party in any country, province, or state in the world ever achieved political power, let alone any kind of opposition status, in a country that does not have PR? Anywhere in the world where the Greens have done well? Well, I can tell you of one in my native Canada. Yes, Donald Trump isn't my president. That province is Prince Edward Island in Canada. Prince Edward Island, it's the land of Green Gables, all that kind of stuff. As in this country, Canada and all its provinces have a first past the post voting system. And PEI, to be clear, is a very tiny province. I used to visit it all the time. 150,000 people, very rural economy. And anyways, there was an election last April, a year ago, April. And the vote of the there's four parties of any importance in PEI: the Tories, the Liberal Party, the New Democratic Party, and the Greens. What happened in that election was that the vote of two of those parties collapsed completely, the Liberals and the New Democratic Party. And in that election, the Greens got 31% of the total vote, or 20% increase over the election in 2015. They then became, amazingly, the second largest party, and therefore became the official opposition. Mind you, I mean, what happened was they're mostly campaigning on housing issues, but that's a whole other thing. But kind of they didn't expect that while they were leading ahead, but in the end, they got 8 votes, they became the official opposition. But after that, I honestly am willing to hear examples. There's no other state, province, country where the Greens have electorally ever been, sorry, bluntly, other than bit players. What is it sort of on the fringes, one MP, 2 MPs, 2 members of some provincial parliament on the electoral stage. Now let's just go across a few countries. Let's go up to Scotland. And I did a very interesting interview with Lorna Slater, who is the co-leader of the Scottish Greens. In the 2016 election, the Greens in Scotland got 6 seats out of 129 in Holyrood. They then joined as supporting the SNP because Sturgeon and the SNP didn't get a majority. They needed to bring the Greens on board. And I'll put in the chat a link, an article, an interview I did with Lorna in Green World magazine. But they can say, Lorna says, we're sort of big players in Holyrood. We got 6 MPs and we chat and we make deals and all this kind of stuff. Let's now move on to New Zealand. Now, New Zealand in 2017, the Greens got 8 out of 120 seats. A myth, some people think that Jacinda Ardern had a majority government. She didn't. In fact, their Tory party, called the National Party, got the most seats. But what happened was, it's a 120-seat legislature. Ardern got 46. She put together the 8 from the Greens and 7 from, or a few other seats from a party called the New Zealand Green Party. And she, in fact, and Labour became the majority government. They became the government using the smaller parties, got votes, and then in fact they were able to overtake the National Party. Let's go to Finland. Finland, my son lives in Finland. I have a warm spot for Finland. The Green League of Finland, which is like the Green Party. In 1995, it became the first Green Party anywhere in the world to be part of a national cabinet. In 2019, they won 20 seats in the Finnish parliament. They got 11% of the vote. And sure enough, they got 10% of the seats. That's the kind of way in general that PR works. And so therefore, right now in Finland, there is a 5-party left ecology coalition, which our colleagues there are part of, also all led by women, which is not just coincidental. This is the kind of thing that PR can do. It's not a magic bullet, etc. But
Alan, just to remind you, you have about half a minute left.
Okay, well, okay, I'll just end on this then. I'll just give you a little a fact. Let's just say the Green Party does really, really well in the next election. That climate change, oh, this is really what we got to really fight for, say the people of Britain. We get UBI becomes the issue, blah, blah, blah. And so if we go from 865,000 votes in 2019 to, in fact, 3.8 million votes in the next election. In other words, we get a 5-fold increase in our vote because we worked hard, we got all these new members, blah, blah, blah. And you know what? We're exactly what UKIP got in 2015, 1 MP. So that in fact, first past the post is in fact not the way that the Green Party is going to get too far. And that's why our view is that we need to campaign, put the pressure on the Labour Party. And that's what Get PR Done does, a multi-party group, etc. And we campaign for the Labour Party out there with our signs, with our leaflets, talking to people. We did that in February and March. I'll just give you last, we handed out 4,000 leaflets to Labour Party members at their hustings. I became good mates with Keir Starmer, let them know that people want PR.
Thank you, Alan, very much for that. And apologies to just looking at the clock here. Thank you very much. Zack, so we have Zack Polanski, as we said, I'm sure be familiar to many of you, who was a candidate for election under a proportional system at the moment. So over to you, Zack.
Thanks, Cormac, and thank you very much to Make Votes Matter for hosting this Fringe, and also welcome. Feel like you're a guest in our house, so to speak, so I hope you find a good reception. So everyone watching this, I'm presuming that most people watching this already support proportional representation by the very fact that you've chosen to come to this webinar. I know it's a slight assumption because there might be some people wondering what it is, and I'll give a little bit of that. But I think what we really need to do is work out how do we take the passion that we feel for proportional representation, everything Alan was just talking about, the fact that it just makes sense that one vote should count equally and everyone's vote should count equally. But what we need to do, and I think what we've not done so far yet, is find a way, a story of taking the passion that we have and transferring it to the average member of the public so that everybody wakes up in the morning and they think, coronavirus, health problems, war and peace, policing problems, we could really solve a lot of these sustainably with proportional representation. Now, you often hear a disingenuous line from people who don't support proportional representation. They say, it's not a silver bullet, it's not a panacea, it won't solve everything. And you know what? They're right. It isn't a silver bullet. It won't solve everything at all. But to my knowledge, no one has ever said it would. But without proportional representation, we can't solve anything sustainably in a democratic way. So this is almost for a metaphor. It's a locked door. And inside the room are all the solutions to all the things we care about, like the climate crisis, for instance. But the door at the moment is locked. So no matter how much we talk about the climate crisis, no matter how we talk about the unfairness of stop and search, no matter how much we talk about aviation expansion, all the things that we regularly think and talk about as Greens, we can't sustainably change these things until we have a fair and equal democratic system. So my first question for you all to think about is, when did you first realize that your vote didn't count? And that's an odd question to ask someone, because we're so used to in this country, the idea that you must go vote. You know, it's your democratic duty. People have died for you to vote, and all of those things are true. I'm not saying they're not. But the real truth here is that your vote doesn't count as much as other people's, depending on where you live. So it's always interesting, I think, to think, when did you first realize that? When did it get you in the gut, the absolute unfairness of running or voting for running is what I do. You're not necessarily running for a party, but voting for a party and wanting them to win, but knowing that everything was stacked against you before you even began. It's so fundamentally unfair. And one thing I know about Britain is we generally care about fairness. Now, fairness is a value that's a tricky one because obviously it's different to different people. But actually, if we start to couch this less in kind of geeky constitutional terms, which are all important, but actually start to look at the very fundamental emotive arguments around proportional representation. And for a start, even the phrase proportional representation, that's going to switch off a lot of people straight away. So we need to find a new language and a new way to talk about these things. As Cormac said, I'm currently running for the London Assembly, which is a proportional representation system. I have to say, I don't think it's the best system in the world. It's a party list system, but it's certainly fairer than the current first past the post. And my experience of it is brilliant because you can knock on someone's door or chat to a friend or a stranger, and you can tell them that their vote counts. For once, every single vote counts. And the only time that I can remember this has happened recently was the Brexit referendum. Now, I was very pro-Remain, but you have to not ignore the fact that so many people came out with so much passion because for the first time in their lives, people got instinctively that they could actually make a difference here, that their one vote could change things. Now, that was a binary option, so of course it was proportional. But we need to get that same power and empowerment to the people. A Green Party value that I absolutely love is we don't often talk about power over people, we talk about power to do things. So this isn't about changing a voting system because we want power over getting more Greens elected, although that would of course be great. It's not about power over Labour to make sure they do the right thing. This is power to empower you, your friends, your neighbours, people you don't know, every single person in this country to have a fair and equal voting system. So just to finish up, I just want to talk about some of the things we're doing to take a step in that direction. Now, Make Votes Matter, I can't endorse more highly. They're doing fantastic work, both in Parliament, which I'm sure Klina will talk about, cross-party groups to get MPs for people who are making these decisions to talk about these things, and also through brilliant work in grassroots in terms of getting communities together. Alan's also doing brilliant work in pressurising the Labour Party. The bit that I feel is missing in the market, so to speak, for want of a better metaphor, is non-violent direct action, the exact work that Extinction Rebellion has been doing. And that's 5 minutes, so I'll talk very, very quickly. Essentially, we're looking at ways of not getting arrested. That's been brilliant for Extinction Rebellion, but problematic for reasons I won't go into in the webinar, but I'm sure are obvious. But we want to find ways to grab people's attention. So one thing we're talking about is finding a way of making it about the elephant in the room. Now, this phrase, the elephant in the room, is because so many times in our constituencies, we talk about target seats or tactical voting. And it's a little bit like we can't do democracy because it's this big thing that no one's talking about. It's almost like we should have in the House of Commons a huge elephant, the MPs peering over and under them, trying to do the basic business of democracy, but all the time having to negotiate for this elephant. So one idea we're talking about is whenever there's a Zoom conference at the moment online, for instance, the Labour meeting, encouraging Labour activists who do support proportional representation to be wearing an elephant mask or to be wearing an elephant costume with no further explanation until someone asks. And the elephant is called EVE because EVE, the acronym, elephants, equal votes for elephants. Now, of course, it's a little bit silly, it's a little bit childish about a very important subject, but that's because I think we need a little bit more fun here and a little bit more imagination. So that's just one idea. We need much better ideas though. So if you do have any ideas, please do find me on Twitter. It's at Zack Polanski. You can email me at info@zackpolanski.com or put things in the chat or mail things to Make Votes Matter who are not involved with the non-violent direct action directly, but I'm sure they'll be very happy to pass on your email details. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zack. I'm thinking I should have brought an elephant mask myself. So that's great. We're going to pass on now to Klina, who, as I said, Klina Jordan, the co-chief executive and co-founder of Make Votes Matter. So take it away, Klina.
Thank you, Cormac, and thanks everyone for having me here, and thanks also to Alan and Zack for joining us. It's great to have kind of various parts of the ecosystem that are pushing for PR all pushing together, which is what we're always trying to do. So I will give you a bit of an overview about Make Votes Matter, the strategy, the theory of change, and also a little bit about how you can get involved. But obviously Cormac's spoken about that a little bit already. So hopefully there won't be too much duplication. And if there is, hopefully it just gets it really sunk into the mind and isn't boring. Apologies again for all the technical issues as we've been going along, and I'll just let you know now that we've discovered that we can't do breakout sessions, like it's not possible on this type of Zoom. So we'll have an extended Q&A section. So you will all have the opportunity to have your questions heard, and we'll be responding to them. But apologies for that, because we did say that we would do that. But I'll do a quick run through about Make Votes Matter, kind of where we come from and where we are and where we're going. So Make Votes Matter started in 2015, the most disproportionate election ever. And there were a whole load of us who were just really infuriated at how ridiculous that election was. And we wanted to do something, and we thought that there wasn't enough happening. And I think that's very much what's happened again with Get PR Done in 2019. They've said, this is ridiculous, we need to do something. And so the more people who are standing up and taking action, the better. So I do invite all of you to do that as well. So we're basically a bunch of activists who gave up past lives in much better paid jobs. We pay ourselves very modest wages that Make Votes Matter to make the money go as far as possible. But we are now a fully fledged campaign and have had made a lot of progress in the last few years. And the whole kind of space has changed a lot consequently. So we've always worked not just on our own campaign, but in trying to help build up and encourage and empower other organisations, so that the sector feels a lot more healthy now. I can remember when we first came into existence, going to a meeting of one of the smaller existing organisations, and the chair saying, "Oh well, this is never going to happen, so well." It's just like, come on, guys. this isn't the way to inspire people. And thankfully that organisation is now very alive, and there's lots of people taking lots of action, and so we have come a long way. I think other key things that have changed is a specific focus on labour, which is one of our 3 campaign strands, and obviously Alan's talked about that as well. So the theory of change is that without having a full-scale revolution, which generally British people don't seem to be too enthusiastic about, we need to get one of the 2 big parties on board, and the Tories aren't looking like they'll do it anytime soon, so we focus on Labour. And we've now had 89 motions raised by constituency Labour parties as a direct consequence of Make Votes Matter's work with the Labour campaign for electoral reform, and various other organisations. And as was mentioned earlier, we've now got this big joint project called Labour for a New Democracy, which is pushing all of that work. So there's a big difference there, and like there are now quite a few unions who back PR, and as Cormac was saying, do please get in touch with your union if you're a member of a union and push them, because the conversation generally isn't happening very much, and so it might be a bit of an open door. And we generally find with Labour and union groups that there isn't very much resistance as soon as people hear the facts. So that's the Labour part of the campaign. I won't go into that in more detail, but you can go to the Labour for a New Democracy website and find out what they're all up to. Another strand is the alliance, which brings together all of the parties that want PR, which is all the British opposition parties aside from Labour, and various parties from Ireland as well. And also all of the organisations that want PR, and lots of public figures and local group leaders and so on. And so we meet in Parliament quarterly, and our kind of big milestone was last summer when we launched the Good Systems Agreement. And the key thing about that is that it takes away from the eternal systems debate, and a lot of the energy of electoral reform over the years has gone into debating, oh, I prefer STV, well, I prefer AMS, blah, 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 all of the acronyms. And it takes a lot of energy, and it also means that people don't take so much action. And the reality is that if you have a different value system, you will end up preferring a different voting system. And of course, people have different values. That's why people are in different parties. So it's unlikely that debate will ever be resolved until there's a real situation where it's going to happen. So the Good Systems Agreement basically says these are the criteria of good voting systems. So proportionality is absolutely key. But there's other things like if lists are used, they need to be democratically determined rather than closed lists where the party bosses get to choose. And there needs to be a constituency link, because people in the UK tend to care about that. And that answers all of the objections that come up about PR. So all of these parties and organisations have agreed to that, and they've also agreed that the best way for the voting system for the UK to be chosen is by a deliberative process that's citizen-led, rather than the politicians choosing how they get elected. And so a citizens' assembly would be an ideal way of doing that. So that's another kind of key part of the path to actually getting to PR. Then the other bit that cannot be ignored, the third strand, is the grassroots, because we need people all over the country demanding PR, taking action, talking to their MPs, doing creative actions that can be local, that could be part of a big national action. So in Make Votes Matter's recent Demand Democracy Day, there was a big banner drop off Westminster Bridge. There were all sorts of other things, exciting things happening around the country, but the Westminster Bridge one was massive. That each letter of Make Votes Matter was 2 meters wide, and there were purple and green and white smoke bombs going off, like the colours of suffrage and the suffragettes. So it's continuing that tradition. So do get involved in and know that there are really exciting, fun things that you can get involved with. It doesn't just have to be writing to your MP. And the last thing I wanted to touch on, I'm sorry if I'm taking too long, I'm not aware of what the timing is, Cormac.
We've more time than expected because of the breakout rooms.
Oh, right, okay. So I'll just quickly wrap up with the outcomes. Again, Zack has referred to this, but to me, this is why I care about democracy, because it determines everything. And I've been an environmental activist my whole life. And I eventually saw, after even a career in a sustainable enterprise, that we cannot affect the change that we need to quickly enough while we're fighting this uphill battle against a system that is stacked against us. So we need democracy to be responsive to the people. We need Parliament to reflect the people. And when it does, you see that you get better outcomes. So you see faster action on climate change, you see better environmental protections. There's huge amounts of evidence from around the world over many decades, from political science. So this is like kind of really credible information about how countries, for example, they ratified the Kyoto Protocol quicker. There's loads of work on this. There are pages on our website. If you go to the section that says why PR, there's a section on the environment there. And there's also a section on equality, because PR has been shown to lead to better equality, including economic equality, and obviously better representation of minorities and women. There are better social outcomes as well. So I think the final one that I have to bring up, which people are often kind of incredulous about, first past the post is the single strongest institutional predictor that democracy will go to war. And that is just bonkers that is the case, and we're not doing more about it. So first past the post is causing war, and we desperately need democracy to move away from that. There are very logical reasons why that's the case. One key bit is lobbying. It's much easier to lobby in a system when one party normally wins, rather than having to talk to all of the different parties. And I was speaking with somebody about this the other day. They were saying when they were in Brussels and seeing how the lobbyists did have to talk to every single little party, and the little parties, they were specifically talking about the Greens, managed to gain a whole load of concessions from somebody who was about to come into power before they actually managed to get into power. And then even though they didn't do enough, they'd already kind of made these public pledges, so they had to stick to it. So it's really important for green politics. So I think the final thing is, do take action, do get involved with fun, creative stuff. The elephant in the Zoom, it's very easy to do. Yeah, if you haven't already, do ask questions or make comments, and we will try our best to answer as many of them as possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Klina. And thank you everyone for sticking with us. Unfortunately, as Klina mentioned, we have been working away over the past 20 minutes or so trying to see if we can get the breakout rooms working, but it seems that there are technical issues, and it looks like we won't be able to do that. But it does mean we have a bit more time for questions. So I've been making a note of a couple of them. So I will, Yes.
Could I just suggest that the most recent question, well, it was the most recent question. Somebody's asked if they could hear the end of what Alan was trying to say, because we didn't think we had enough time, but then we've realised we've got a little bit more. So, Alan, would you be willing to say a little bit more to finish up what you were saying when you had to stop?
Oh, Alan, you're on mute.
You need to turn off the mute.
Unmute. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's a real hard job winning over the Labour Party. I wouldn't say it's easy at all, but we, for example, I'll put it in the chat. I was able, with a colleague, to do a 1,000-word article in the Morning Star on PR, which I was surprised they even accepted. And I'll tell you about like a little incident that happened. There's a left of Labour is a particularly hard nut to crack because it's called Labourism, as in the interview with Clive Lewis I put in this thread. This idea that Labour are the only progressive party in fact, the country. And that is a fairly widespread view, especially in the Labour left. And there's one, the Labour left now is a little bit upset, very upset about Starmer and what happened to Jeremy and all this kind of stuff. But back in February, a little group, it's not that big, but it's called Labour Left Alliance, had its founding convention here in Sheffield. And what happened there was that, in fact, three of us, me from the Green Party, a friend of mine from the Green Party, Juliet, and a Lib Dem went down and stood outside with these big placards, etc., and passed out well over 100 leaflets and got into very good discussions at the founding convention of Labour Left Alliance. Now, I don't want to claim that they changed their view because of our leaflets, to be very clear. But actually, in the August conference of Labour Left Alliance, they, in fact, are moving more and more towards PR. And this is what, it tends to be somewhat more the people like Stephen Kinnock and the more sort of right of Labour, which is open Labour, which are more in favor of PR. But what we need to do is get also the left side. We're working with people in our group for Momentum. If Momentum gets on board with PR, I'm hoping we've had several Zooms, one with Clive Lewis, one with two New Zealand Greens. We're having one getting ready for the Lib Dems. But we want to, in fact, what's the socialist case for PR? To, in fact, speak directly to these people as to, in fact, this is actually the way, folks, if you want to get the Tories out, that in fact, this is one of the prime ways to do that. Because as Clive Lewis says in this Green World talk that I put, no one really, if you're honest, in the Labour Party thinks that Labour is going to win the next election. In order for Labour to win the next election, they have to increase their number of MPs by 60%. They'd have to win 124 extra seats. This idea that people in the red wall, where I live up in the north, are all going to go back to Labour. They just sort of parked their votes once with Boris. I'm sorry, that really is not it's going to happen. And I mean, we can never predict elections, but if we can sort of a bit of demoralization strategy of Labour, this one last heave, and we get out there, well, and actually I think the chances are very strong that Labour is going to lose 5 elections in a row. How many times do they have to know that actually this system is not working for them? Because I want to tell you, my main fear is the following. If we were sitting here now in 2021, what might happen in the next election? The Tories would drop from 43% as they got here to 35% and still be the majority government. And that's exactly what happened to Tony Blair in 2005. Tony Blair and Labour got to 35% of the vote and still stayed as the government. So we're actively campaigning, doing memes, doing everything like this, and get ready now, especially to win over unions, because as Zack said, or Cormac, 50% of labor, and the two big ones we have to crack are Unite, and Len McCluskey was dead against PR. He's leaving. And Unison, the second big union, is also not come out in favor of PR. This is what we, in fact, have to work on, is getting labor. And then it's, in fact, all of us against the Tories. I really like those odds. You know, Plaid Cymru, Greens, SNP, blah, 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 against the Tories. That definitely tilts the balance for PR. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, I absolutely agree in terms of that focus on the unions. I see one or two questions that have come in asking about that. So yes, as you said, Unite and Unison and GMB as well are extremely influential. We actually had planned for the summer. Activists for equal votes within those unions had sent motions, and they were to be debated at this summer's policy conferences of all three of Unite, Unison, and GMB. Obviously, those have not taken place due to the pandemic. But we're hoping whenever they're rescheduled, it's going to be a bit unclear as to whether the motions are rolling over or not. So certainly, once we have some more information on that, we really encourage everyone, if you are a member of one of those unions or any other trade union, it's something really important to push. We think it's quite likely, as Klina said, once you actually get out there and open a conversation about how a proper democracy actually leads to better outcomes, most people are actually in favor. But it's as I think Zack said as well, sometimes it can be difficult for people to make that connection between the fact that our health system or the living world is not the issues there to make that connection between that and the lack of democracy. I'm going to move on to a couple of these questions because we have some very good questions coming in. So if you've put a question either in the chat or in the Q&A, we'll try to get to as many as we can. So I will, I guess we have time to let you ask the question if you like. I will unmute you and you can have a chance to ask it. So Rebecca Warren, I think you had a really interesting point about the Conservative Party. I'm going to, hopefully you should be able to unmute yourself and say it.
It wasn't actually a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. It wasn't actually a question. It was just something I put in the chat for you to possibly respond to. I put the same comment into the previous conversation, which was about how do we win power. But yeah, I think Labour is just completely missing a trick. But I don't. Well, I can't understand the position of somebody who is a completely tribal Labour member.
Sure. Thank you, Rebecca. And I think it was quite an interesting point about the current Conservative Party as well, only being able to exist in its current form due to the first past the post system. That if there was a different system with different incentives, that there would be whether it would force the party to change in order to work with others. Next up, Josh Morris Blake, I see you had a question about the kind of the exact mechanics in terms of referendums. So let me just see. You should hopefully be able to ask the question now. If you
yeah, thanks. I was just wondering if Make Votes Matter currently has a policy on whether, following on from any citizens' assemblies, it would want a referendum to be held, or whether the current government would then just be able to implement a new system that had been agreed through the assemblies.
So I think in a moment we're going to put that question, I suppose, particularly to Klina, but I'll see if I can take one more question as well. let me see. Andrew Bell had an interesting question in relation to local government. You should be able to unmute yourself now, Andrew.
Hi, yeah, it was just a point about using the local government reorganisation white paper as a hook to put forward a motion on PR or electoral form at a local level. So in Exeter, where we've got a large Labour majority, that is what we're proposing to do. We only have one Green councillor in Exeter, but we're working together as a progressive group with 2 Lib Dem councillors and an independent. So we're proposing to put forward a motion in the next few weeks to try and get Labour to support PR at a local level, which obviously puts them in a bit of a difficult position if they don't support it. So I think it's quite a good strategy. It'd be quite a good thing for other councils with Green representation to try and do.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll actually just take maybe one more, and then we'll put those to the 3 panelists. Mike Shaw, I know this is a question that we get a lot. You should be able to speak now.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the allegation that's often made that under PR, the extreme right-wing parties would gain representation. I'm thinking back to, I'm in the Yorkshire and Humberside, and in the European elections a couple of times ago, we had 3, I think, BNP people elected, and welcome the panel's response to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Klina, would you like to go first in terms of taking on some of those questions?
Sure. Thanks, Cormac, and thanks everyone for the questions and the comments. So, Josh, in terms of having a referendum to confirm, I think referendums are great democratic tools if done well. The problem with the UK at the moment is it's really not a democracy, and the referendums that have been done in recent years have not been done democratically. And this isn't about the outcomes. It's about, well, it's not me saying that kind of the decision to leave in the referendum, for example, was wrong. What I'm saying is the way that that came about was not democratic. So we don't have the controls on the spending in referendums that would be needed to actually make them fair. So what you end up seeing, as happened with the AV referendum in 2011, and I always say AV is not a form of PR, we've never had a referendum on the voting system, but loads of money was thrown at the No campaign because they actually got worried that it might pass. And so they were saying that they were showing huge pictures on the underground of babies in incubators saying that they would die if we changed the voting system because there wouldn't be enough money. And there was another one of a soldier, and they were saying that this soldier would die because there wasn't enough money for them to have their protective equipment. And so we're all aware that there's a lot of falsehood in some political campaigning, and there's a big problem with regulating online campaigning. So I think referendums in our current state are really dangerous. So this is why we debated this at huge length with the Alliance, and in the Good Systems Agreement, we didn't advocate a referendum because of this. But in other situations, for example, in Ireland around the reproductive rights, the way it worked there, they had a citizens' assembly which put forward proposals. And because there was so much engagement around that, the people were really talking about it and thinking about it. So when the referendum came, it was an absolutely overwhelming response. And the kind of the money being thrown at it didn't actually affect it to change the way that the people were thinking too much. But I think we would look at a referendum with caution, but at the same time, because we previously had a referendum on the voting system, I think some people would think that we needed to have another one. But I think, again, like, we are under a first past the post system, and if you get a majority in government, the idea is meant to be that you have a mandate to do whatever you said you were going to do. So I think on that basis, our approach to trying to get a majority of pro-PR MPs elected actually then if you do that, you hold the citizens' assembly, you do lots of public engagement, and you actually implement it. And then you can do a confirmatory referendum down the line. And so that's what happened in New Zealand. They'd switched to PR, and then they had another referendum to say whether or not they were still happy with it. And overwhelmingly, they were happy with it, and they didn't want to go back to first past the post. So I'd say if there's a referendum, it should be a confirmatory one once people have had a chance to try PR. I've said quite a lot on that, so I'll just respond very, very briefly to the others. Andrew, about getting Labour to support PR locally, that's absolutely brilliant, and where other people have done that, I've been very supportive. Make Votes Matter is a national campaign for proportional representation in the House of Commons, but we do support people campaigning for PR in whatever other circumstances as well, so we would be happy to provide support. And then regarding the extreme right getting in, the thing with PR is that anyone who is being voted for gets into Parliament in the proportion that people want them in Parliament. And what you find with proportional systems, real democracy is self-correcting. So if you vote someone in, they do a bad job, you see they've done a bad job, and you vote them out. So I don't think we need to worry about, like, the whole of Parliament suddenly isn't going to get taken over by the extreme right if we move to PR. And in fact, we have that exact same situation now under first past the post, because the Tories are trying to, like, not lose their vote to what was UKIP, and then they've morphed into the Brexit Party effectively. Because of that, they've captured government effectively. So I think, and we could say the same about Trump. So first past the post actually results in much more extremism. I'll stop now.
Sure, thanks, Klina. Zack or Alan, do either of you have something?
I'll just speak briefly. I'm actually I'm just speaking my own point of view, not for Get PR Done. We don't have a position on this. I actually think that it's very dangerous to have a referendum on PR under current circumstances. I look at a place like British Columbia in Canada, where in the province, they had 3 referendums on PR in the last 20 years. Every one of them lost. What happened was, like, the pro-PR forces started out ahead, but by the time of the referendum, voting day, I was always first past the post at 1. And referendums are very hard to change as a vehicle to change major systems. And I quote Mr. Dominic Cummings on that very point. There's a fantastic video he did several years ago that they didn't expect to win, whatever. And he explains very well that they didn't think that people would actually vote to change the system of being in the European Union as a result of a referendum. One of the reasons, not the only one, that people did in fact vote for Brexit was that there's so much pent-up hatred of somebody, and because, like, as I said, 4 million people voted for UKIP in 2015, and they didn't get a single MP out of that. So what I would suggest instead is that what we need to do, first of all, I mean, it's a bit schematic, win over Labour to PR. Then what happens, I don't know, but then get a Labour government in on a platform, manifesto commitment to bring in PR. Then, in fact, have a vote, a real general election, maybe in 2027, based on PR, so people sort of get used to it. And then we have a referendum. The problem is, it's very easy. It happened in the AV referendum in 2011. Oh, this is all too complicated. This is all this, signs on buses, all the kind of stuff that Klina was speaking about. That to make a change on a referendum, oh, what about my constituency? It would be better for, in fact, the people to get used to the way PR works, and then, in fact, have a referendum confirming what happened. Yes, New Zealand did do that, but they had 2 referendums. One was, do you want to change the voting system? Which amazingly, 1992, 85%, I think it was, said we want to change the voting system. Then the next year, well, what kind of a change do you want to make? I do think it's very dangerous. I really don't like the idea that we would campaign for so many years and then it gets shot down because the Daily Mail, the Sun, all this kind of stuff. Let's get people used to it. Sort of like sex, you know, hey, sex is good. Let's have this. Let's have more. But the idea is if you sort of make it like, oh God, I'll never see my constituent and my MP. It's going to be this, it's going to be that. We have to get people used to the idea, as 90 other countries in the world are, to in fact have PR.
And I think it's one thing that has been doing the rounds online in the last month is there's only 2 countries in Europe that use first past the post, and one of them is our country and the other is Belarus. Zach, is there anything you'd like to come in there?
Yeah, so just to run through them all very quickly, I'd start with Rebecca's comment. I know it wasn't a question, but I can't resist responding to it. And this is the idea of Labourism. Because being honest, I'm absolutely furious at Labour. The way that they treated Molly Scott-Cato and Stroud, for instance, and just generally some of the behaviour of some of the activists that has come directly from their MPs, from the sheer Labourism. Either we have a one-party state under Labour and there is no alternative, there can be no other dissenting voices. Now, I'm caricaturing that. Of course, there's some great Labour MPs. Clive Lewis has been mentioned a couple of times. I think he's a shining example of a Labour MP that's practically a Green and he's probably in the wrong party. But I think we need to look at how do we deal with Labour, because fury is not going to cut it. So although I can feel furious, I just don't think it's going to do a lot if I just keep shouting, or if we all just keep shouting at Labour MPs. If anything, they're just going to go further into their trenches. They're going to point at the Green Party and say, this is why we can't work with them. So we've got to find a way in some ways to love them even more. And I think one of the ways to do that is to reach out to your Labour activists. And I'm talking about your general casual Labour activists, or even just general Labour voters. Because they campaigned under a slogan of the many and not the few. And I can't think of anything more of an antithesis to that than first past the post, which gives a few people a lot of power over the many. So I think we've got to appeal to Labour activists' sense of fairness, of social justice, of equality, and recognise that we believe in a lot of the same things with different emphasis or different focus. And I think we've got to find a way to have that conversation. And that leans into Josh's question. And Klina and Alan have pretty much covered this, so I'll do it very quickly. But I think we've got to look at the circumstances under which we would possibly have a referendum about PR, or more ideally, put PR into law. And that's going to be through the Labour Party. And I think one of the ways that that can happen is through a progressive alliance. Now, I know the words progressive alliance are highly contentious, particularly in Green Party circles. We've been burnt a couple of times now. But I think as a candidate, I can only speak as a candidate, not as a party, I would struggle to stand against a Labour Party whose leader was advocating for PR, whose candidate was advocating for PR, and dealing with the climate emergency and was anti-austerity. If those 4 factors were in place, then I think we're looking at a position where Greens would have to stand down, and I'd imagine the Lib Dems would be having that conversation too, about for one election only, making sure we got proportional representation. Now that's going to be a hell of a fight, because there's going to be a public and opponents who are going to be very keen to paint us as saying, look how privileged they are, the only thing they care about is voting systems. So I think, again, to come back to what I was saying earlier, it's absolutely incumbent on us to make sure that we get across to the public that this voting system is key and fundamental to everything. Citizens' assemblies in themselves are problematic. I think, you know, I've certainly advocated them through Extinction Rebellion and through the Green Party, but we do really need to look at what is the difference between a citizens' assembly that comes up with recommendations, where are the teeth, and how does this idea of direct democracy relate to politicians? I think those are all good questions, but I think we don't even get onto those questions until we make sure we've got a Labour Party that's supporting proportional representation. So that's the intervention point for me. On Andrew's question, sorry?
If you go for it very quickly, we'll take another.
Sure. On Andrew's question, he's doing brilliant work in Exeter are doing brilliant work there. Absolutely, I'd encourage all local parties to put forward proportional representation motions at local council. Do you think we need to be careful here? Here's my caveat. Labour in particular will do everything they can to say, of course we support proportional representation. We need to have an support electoral reform. We need to have an elected House of Lords. We need local councils having proportional representation. Those things are absolutely true, but they're not true if you're using them as a distraction from getting PR at the House of Commons. So I think these things need to be yes and, not instead of or. I think we need to be very clear with Labour that what we're talking about is proportional representation for the House of Commons being the game changer for the House of Lords being elected and the locals. And then finally, with Mike's question on the extreme right, I always think back to when Nick Griffin was finally allowed on Question Time, which, you know, we were all up in arms about, understandably. but given an hour to speak, the BNP, I think, were bankrupt literally a few months later, if not a year later. If you give these people the platform, they will ruin themselves. And I think we saw in Yorkshire and Humber, in fact, that then Majid went on to be the MEP. So I think when we give people platforms to have fair democracy and fair ways to have these conversations, then actually if people want to vote for UKIP, or if they want to vote for parties that are even further right, they should have that possibility to do so. And we as Green Party activists have to get better arguments. And those better arguments will stand more in the spotlight when we have a fair democracy. So getting proportional representation, in short, is everything.
Thank you, Zach. We're going to do one or two very quick fire questions, as unfortunately time is against us. To answer one or two short ones, I think it's Raphael asking about what Unison's position on PR is. Unison currently have no position. So they've no position one way or another on electoral reform. We very much think it's possible to push them towards taking a positive position in favor. We've a few questions asking about, do local councils actually have the power to change the voting system themselves? The answer is not in England. So in Scotland and Northern Ireland, local elections are already done proportionally. In Wales, there is a bill currently going through at the moment in the Senate to give councils this power. So it's something that any members here from the Wales Green Party definitely worth pushing on. In England, certainly can be helpful in terms of raise the profile of the issue and build up campaigns, but unfortunately at the moment councils don't have that power. Fergal McEntee asked a question about about Tories. We do have one Tory MP in the Make Votes Matter alliance, and we are working to get more support, but it's certainly the case that they are quite behind Labour. I'm going to read out, I won't have time to actually pop you on mute, but to read out the final set of questions and then pass it around to the panel to answer them and any final comments. Declan Walsh is asking whether we need any internal changes within the party if we have a PR future, and if there's more coalition governments, whether there needs to be any changes within Green Party structures. Martin Blake had a question about the various different organizations all campaigning on this. You got Electoral Reform Society, Unlock Democracy, whether it's useful or not to have this kind of variety of organizations. And then finally on, I think, Rebecca Dunn, a very common question people say, well, isn't it fair to elect the person who got the largest vote? PR won't work. So I'll put those to the panel if you'd like to, if we have time to address those, and then make any final comments. Apologies to everybody we didn't get to. We just have the clock against us. So Zach, if you'd like to go to answer those and any final wrap up.
For sure. So Declan's question, first of all, about internal democracy. I'm a huge fan of the fact that the Green Party don't have a whip, and I think it's one of our unique markers that I think we can put over to voters to say that when you elect your local politician as an MP or local councillor or assembly member, wherever it is on the scale, you know that they're voting with their conscience for you, the constituents, and not for the Green Party. There is, of course, a responsibility for them to follow the Green Party philosophy and values, and if they stray out of that, then there's a disciplinary process in the most extreme circumstances. But I think generally, I think it's a good system to actually allow people to use their conscience and to vote with that. I do support recall mechanisms, not just for Green MPs. This wasn't an attack on Caroline, but generally for any MP. I think, you know, if they break the laws, then constituents should have the mechanism to be able to call them back. In terms of our internal democracy, I think when we elect people and select them in positions, we're giving them that responsibility, and we're also giving them our trust in doing that. I think it's from the West Wing, there's a line about having audits, and the president says, yes, there's audits every few years, they're called elections. And I think if we elect a Green Party politician or candidate that we don't approve of, or does something we don't like, then actually there's a selection process just around the corner, and the people can put their voice over there. Martin asked about organisations. I'm slightly split on this one. Part of me goes, wouldn't it be great just to have one voice moving in one direction? But actually, I think there's something really nice about having different voices with different focuses and different kind of intentions. I think the important thing is that they're working together and that they're all moving together in the same intention in roughly the same direction. So there's not squabbling or fighting between them. that they're not communicating with each other, so people aren't covering the same kind of ground twice. And so I just think it's important as organizations we work together more and realize what kind of areas people are working in, and then go, okay, where's there a space and I can help this. Just to add with that, Cormac said that Unison and Unite don't currently have a position on electoral reform. That's absolutely true. The bit I'd add means it's absolutely up for grabs. So I think influencing trade unions is something we all need to be doing right now. But there's loads of different ways of doing that. So you've got to have different organizations to do that, whether it's you personally joining a trade union and creating it in the inside, whether it's turning up at those trade union meetings and causing disruption, whether it's influencing a friend that you have who's in the trade union in a polite conversation and asking them to make your vote count and making that really personal connection. So there's loads of different ways to do this. And I think all the different organizations demonstrate that. And finally, on Rebecca's point about fairness, I think this is where we've got the biggest job of all, is to demonstrate how proportional representation is a fairer system than what we've currently got. And I think the only way we can do that is not through explaining to people, although that's important, but it just takes too long. You lose people unless they're already engaged. We need to find metaphors and stories and ways of demonstrating it. We need trusted people, generally in public or in political life, that people trust to be stepping forward and saying, yes, actually, this is a really good thing. And once again, it's repetitive, but we need the Labour leadership to also be calling for it and moving in that direction. I think through all of those things, we can still have conversations about fairness, but it's just less of a challenge because people generally go, don't quite understand it, but I get a general sense it's fair. And actually, just on a very last point, it's kind of dawning on me recently that this includes in the Green Party. We're all in a webinar right now about proportional representation, so I think we just assume that everyone in the Green Party is in favour of it. The more I investigate, the more I think that most of the Green Party are in favour of it. And then there's a much bigger majority who are in favour of it that don't really know what it is, but they just know it's a good thing because they've heard Caroline Lucas or Sean Berry talk about it, which is great, they're talking about it, but I think people need to understand it more. And then I think there's a small minority that don't necessarily support it because they have no idea what it is. So actually one of the biggest actions in my mind you can do and take away from this is actually talk about PR more, not in a way that bores people, but whenever we talk about any other issue, link it to the fact that it's a product of the unfair voting system. A fair voting system would mean every vote would count and we could get things done and change.
Absolutely. And as I said, we're offering speakers to your Green Party branches. So definitely you're welcome to invite someone. Alan, very quickly, do you have any responses to those or any final points?
Yeah, I think there is a real value in having a variety of groups, that we're going to take a particular kind of view. We're speaking at a Unite meeting in a few days. They want a session on PR, blah, blah, blah. I think it's really valuable not to, to have all voices matter, that in fact, we actually move ahead, except that the goal is PR, but that there's different ways to get there. We've chosen to focus exclusively on the labor. We don't do stalls in the high street. We don't do any of that. We don't have too many resources. And let me just leave people with one last thought. I see my friend Declan Walsh is in this call. It's said that the way to get sort of things better for the Green Party is to elect more Green councillors. Well, I don't quite know how many Green councillors there were in 2010, but I know now there's all over 300. And I want to suggest that a much greater focus should be on campaigning for PR, because once you in fact change the government in Westminster, as happened in Holyrood, then that's the main reason why they have local governments have PR, is because Holyrood is in fact based on PR. They'd be very hypocritical to say, well, it's okay for Holyrood to have PR, but not the local councils. That we've really got to understand the importance of capturing in the most centralized unitary country in the developed world, capturing and doing our very best to get Westminster. And I honestly think that if we want to do that, we should be putting the kind of resources into PR that we're putting into getting, maybe we'll get 600 councillors. I'm sorry, I honestly don't think that if we get 600 councillors next May, that's going to dramatically change the balance of power in this country. You can't fight climate change very much at the local level. It has to be national policies. And that's why I'm down the beginning. Get PR done nationally, in Finland, in many countries. And, you know, look what's happening in America. I talked to, had a long interview with Howie Hawkins. If you think things are bad, and he's the Green Party, by the way, candidate for president. Of course, nobody here has even heard of him. But if you think things are bad here, you should see the United States. I mean, it really is a terrible system. And Canada, my homeland, is there. But we really got to ramp up enthusiasm, because I actually think there's quite a lot of defeatism in the Green Party. We can't do it. Yeah, I like PR, but what can we do about it? Listen, folks, we have to be like the spirit of the suffragettes. We're going to push and push and push. And in fact, that will, in the end, if we do a good job, get organized, have good slogans, be creative, as Zack says, then in fact, I think we can win.
We certainly can win. Thank you, Alan. So last word then goes to Klina, because I know that a lot of you here will be wanting to head off to the next Fringe. So thanks for sticking with us. So Klina, any responses and any final comments?
Thank you, Cormac, and thanks, Zack and Alan. I'm going to pick up on the question from Martin about whether it's good to have the variety of organisations campaigning for PR. And yes, I agree with Alan that it is good to have the different approaches. We like to see it as an ecosystem. So the Electoral Reform Society, they're an institution. They do great work. They've been working on this for over 130 years. They're brilliant at doing media engagement. They really get into the press. So they do lobbying as well. So they need to be there. They have a very different approach to us. We're much more kind of do the legwork, kind of grassroots, getting them, try and pull the levers that actually make the changes, like getting motions raised from constituency Labour parties. But that needs to be happening alongside, and then the work that Get PR Done is doing, being a bit more challenging to Labour, needs to happen as well. Whereas the Make Votes Matter approach is much more kind of from the inside of Labour, like Labour people encouraging Labour people, very kind of friendly and less of the challenging. But it all needs to be happening. And the way that we coordinate this is in the Make Votes Matter Alliance, which meets quarterly in Parliament. And so we do stay linked up about what we're all doing. We've got kind of various WhatsApp chats and things as well. And we all meet, of course. So I think the more the merrier, as long as it stays linked up and as long as it doesn't turn into the People's Front of Judea and the Judean People's Front, because that isn't very helpful. So then I'll move on to Rebecca's question. Isn't it fair to give the seat to the person with the largest vote? And yes, of course, that kind of on the surface of it, like so many things, on the surface of something, it looks one way, and then if you look deeper, then no. The problem with that is that in a multi-party system, i.e. if you have more than two parties, then mathematically you almost certainly can't result in an outcome where the winner, well, not almost certainly, but you often result in situations where the winner doesn't have the majority of the vote. So you have lots of MPs elected on much less than 50% of the votes in their constituencies. And it gets even worse when you scale that up across the whole country, because, for example, let's say the Greens were getting 10% across the entire country, but in order to win a seat, you normally need to get at least kind of 30-something%. So normally the Greens don't get in, and this is of course what we see. And it's fantastic that we have Caroline Lucas, but we don't have enough representation across the country. So you can't make seats match votes if you don't have proportional representation. And the outcomes that we want to see about the environment, about the climate and ecological crises, you get those better outcomes with proportional representation where people are genuinely represented. So please do take action. Please do get involved with the campaigns you've seen here today and the other democratic campaigns. And do remember to keep it fun. If it's not fun, it's not sustainable. Here's Eve, the equal votes elephant. If you've got an elephant, take it to your next Zoom. And we're talking about making print-off elephants so you can make your own mask. So yeah, let's make sure that this is a fun way to get real democracy.
Absolutely. And that's a great point to finish up on. I see the party is asking us to wrap up so we can get ready for the next session. Thank you so much to Klina, to Alan, to Zack, and to all of you for coming in. I'm going to post one last time the link if you want to get involved to Make Votes Matter. And thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Bye-bye.